सबैलाई नमस्कार। मेरो नाम हुम गुरुङ। आज टक्कै संसारभरि छरेर रहेका दाइ दिदीबहिनी सबैलाई हामीले आमन्त्रणा गरेका छौँ। यो प्रोग्राम आज हामी we are very lucky. We have Professor Alan Macfarlane from Cambridge University. So today we will have English, Nepali, and also alikati Tamu wherever possible. So we will have presentation of multi-language webinar by Professor Alan Macfarlane. So about 50 years ago, Professor Alan Macfarlane went to Thak village in western Nepal, about 4 hours walk from Pokhara, and where he did his PhD in 1968-69. So today we are very honored to welcome Professor Alan Macfarlane, and we have people from today wide range of people from 20 years to 95 years. Also from the village, all the way from the village, and all the way from different countries around the globe. So it is my privilege to welcome. I think many of you know. So we did an extensive research beyond his PhD research in Nepal, in England, China, Japan, and Nepal. So already published more than 20 books, and also edited more than 20 books, and also numerous journal publication on social anthropology. I think today's talk will be very interesting and inspired, particularly the youth people, youth who really wants to know about their place, about their village, about their ancestral lands, where today many of us are not in the village. But at the same time, it's very important to go there and to learn about the history of the Gurungs and the people, so that in the long run, we can really benefit from our ancestors. So this talk today, because we there also be live on Facebook through TECANET and Martin Chautari, Chajalu News, Tamu from Pokhara, and Nagrik Khabar. It is also very important to know that this program is jointly organized in collaboration with Martin Chautari, which is knowledge-based and focused on research. So we are very also grateful and thank you Martin Chautari for joining for this as our partner. So yeah, I think because the talk will be very, very useful, we also like to invite your children who are behind you or sitting behind you to listen the talk, because there are very rare and historic photographs that will highlights in the past what Thaks looks like in the past 50 years ago, and since then how it has been changing. I think that will give lots of sites of the village and how the Gurung societies or communities are transforming. So this is very, very important, and you are most welcome to invite your children, your near and dear ones, so that they will learn about today's talk. So and recently Professor Alan has the very interest on visual anthropology, lots of interest in visual anthropology. That will be also very interesting to learn. And nevertheless, I'd like to welcome Alan So Sikles Serbi and Thousand Asaba Judi Paragu. So nevertheless, we also try to speak some Gurungs. So for myself, again, Hum Gurung, I come from Sikles village, but I am currently based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, working for the BirdLife International for Singapore and Malaysia, and looking after 15 countries around Asia as part of our program. And our main office is in Cambridge, in University, where Professor Alan is based. So I'd like to now welcome Professor Alan, for his talk. And Namaste, Terry Azulai Swagacha, Ekdom Swaganbu, ki talk Lyra. Now, please, you can share your screen. After the talk program, today's Q&A session will be led by Dr. Gurung, my colleague Dr. Gurung. So Dr. Gurung will take your questions. You can type all your questions in the chat box, and he will compile the question and read for Professor Alan. Then he will do his best to answer. If they are very similar questions, we'll try to compile them. That we want more questions and more thoughts, and also different insights about the talk. So Dr. will lead the Q&A session after the talk program by Professor Alan Macfarlane. So please go ahead, Professor Alan Macfarlane.
So, nga mi ram gurung, nga toson temme, nga bele saint tomba, kilai chugu tomage pomba, nga lentai toson ayaimu, son basa ayaimu, taile nga chugu tomagi shemliai. Gara madido. I hope you are all very well, and it is a great pleasure and privilege to talk to you. And very strange, after 50 years when there was no electricity, no cars, nothing, now to be talking to Gurung friends all over the world. And a particular pleasure because, as you will see from my talk, the Gurungs mean a great deal to my wife Sarah and I. They have changed my life. So I would now like to talk to you, and I will talk quite slowly because I know that some of you English is a second or third language. So I will talk slowly about what I have learned from working with the Gurungs or Tamu. So next slide. Many people ask me why I went to the Gurungs. I could have gone anywhere in the world, but why the Gurungs? Well, the story starts at my birth in Assam in Long, 1941, during the war, just before the Japanese entered the war. In fact, the day they went into Hong Kong, I think, December 1941. And I was born there, the son of tea planter parents, but my father was in the army at the time, obviously. And so I was brought up for my first 5 years in Assam and India. And I think that's the main reason, ultimately, why I went back or went to the Gurungs, because as a child, I came to love and be very interested in India. And you can see that even when I'm about 2 years old here, where I'm with my best friend, my mother tells me, who was a sweeper's son, so lower caste, and we're sharing a duckling, as you can see there. So my first language, probably, or my second language was Urdu, although of course I've forgotten it all. And so from my memory of my first 5 years, there are dim memories of India, and particularly of my ayahs who looked after me and who were from the hill tribes, the Garos and the Khasis, who are really very similar to the Gurungs. They're all Tibeto-Burman speaking peoples. And so I've always found such people particularly attractive. And if I was a psychologist, I would say it's because the first faces I saw when I was a baby were Tibeto-Burman people. Anyway, I came back to England, and next slide. Next.
Yeah, I'm doing.
Nothing is happening.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. That's it. So I came back to England and I studied history at Oxford University. But then I thought I would really like to learn to be an anthropologist. So I went to the London School of Economics, and then where was I going to do field work? Well, I obviously wanted to go back to Assam and work with the Garos or the Khasis or the Nagas or some of the hill tribes of Assam. And there was the question of who would supervise me. So I was appointed a supervisor from School of Oriental and African Studies, who you can see on the bottom left of the picture, Christoph von Führer-Heimendorf, the head of the department there, a really great anthropologist. He had worked in Hyderabad, he'd worked in Arunachal Pradesh, he'd worked famously with the Nagas, and he was the first Western anthropologist to go into Nepal in 1954. He was appointed my supervisor and tried to get me into the hills of Assam, but there was a Naga rising at that time, so I couldn't go. And I said, well, where shall I go? And he said, what about Nepal? I'd never heard of Nepal, I don't think, at that time. So I said, well, where is that? So he got out a map and showed me where Nepal was. So I said, okay, where? And he said, well, I've traveled all over Nepal, and I've been through an area in the Annapurna Mountains where people called the Gurungs live. And they are a very nice people. And I've been to Siklis and I filmed there, and I've seen some strange rituals. And I advised a young man called Bernard Pignade, a Frenchman, to go and work as an anthropologist there. And he went and came back. And very sadly, he died shortly after he came back. And his book on the Gurungs, Les Gurung, has just been published. And it's a wonderful book, but there's obviously much more work to be done there. So why don't you go to the Gurungs? So I said, okay. And so within a month or two of that decision, without any language, without any training, without any knowledge, I set off for Nepal with my wife, my first wife, Jill. Next slide. Well, I think all of you watching this probably know where the Gurungs are, but maybe you don't know where Tak is. Tak is just north of Pokhara. It's about 4 hours walk north of Pokhara, as you can see there. And in fact, the place I was meant to be going to was Siklis, because it's a big Gurung village, and Heimendorf said, go to Siklis. So I got trekking permission to go to Siklis. This is in 1968, 51 years ago. But when I set off, as I'll explain, I gave up and stopped halfway at Tak. So we went by the Middle East. The planes had to stop many times, so we stopped in the Middle East, and then we stopped in Delhi, and then we went to Kathmandu. Next slide. You won't believe what Kathmandu was like then. This is Swayambhanut, which you'll all know. And as you see, all around at the bottom, there are no houses. It was just the monastery. And that's how Kathmandu was then. Next slide. Beautiful, of course, because the temples and the way of life was still much as it had been for hundreds of years. This is soon after Nepal opens to Westerners, 14 years after. And there were hardly hotels, perhaps half a dozen or so hotels. And you could buy all things, just kerosene lamps, few things. So we stopped with a few things there. And the only way to go to Pokhara then, there was no road from Kathmandu, of course, or anywhere else. You either had to walk there or you had to fly. So we flew to Pokhara. Next slide. Again, it'd be difficult for younger people to know what Pokhara was like in 1968. This is the center around Mahendra Pool with the Fishtail Mountain behind, as you see. And as you see, people carrying things on the back. There's my wife sitting in front of a little pagoda there in red. And I think there were 6 cars in Pokhara, all taxis. There were about 4 hotels. The only food you could get in any of the hotels was fried eggs as a Westerner. Obviously, you could get dal bhat. But that was it. Nothing there. A small hospital of a kind, government offices, but that's it. Next slide. And this is the sort of average street. This is the back way up to the center of Pokhara. Newar sort of architecture, which has all, of course, been pulled down. And this would now just be one traffic jam. But that's how it was. Next slide. And this is Lakeside. If any of you have been to Lakeside Pokhara, you'll know it doesn't look like that now. If I would have bought this bit of land and now be a multimillionaire, because of course it's absolutely filled with hotels and restaurants and so on. Land is probably more expensive than in Cambridge. But there's my wife, Jill, with the lake behind. And that was Pokhara. Anyway, we stocked up and prepared ourselves, and next slide. Set off. We took the wet season route by mistake. And so it took us 2 days to get to Tak. And Tak is up on near the top of the slope. You can see 1 or 2 houses down a little bit from the top. That is Tak on this very, very steep rocky hillside. A very rough path up to it, the last bit, which you had to walk, actually pull yourself up by your hands. You could hardly walk on it. And so after 2 days of struggling, we arrived exhausted in Tak and asked where we were, and they said Tak. And so we thought, well, and they said, why don't you stop here? You're obviously exhausted, you can't go on sick list. We stopped in Tak, or Tolson as it's known. Next slide. This is the village as it was in 1968, looking down from above the village. And you can see the path down, and then in the distance, you can see the long plain, river plain down to Pokhara, which I walked up and down for the first 16 or 17 times that we've been to Tak, and then later there was a road. And you can see that the houses right pitched on the top of this hill. People often wonder why Gurung villages are built on the top of ridges, and one reason is that it's a very ecologically sensible place, because the Gurungs originally were very dependent on the forest, and they had their buffalo there and they cut their wood and so on. So if they'd put their villages right down in the plains, there'd have been a huge distance to go up to the forests. So they're halfway between their grain fields lower down to the valley and their forest resources above. The other reason is that they are highland people, and they've come down, as Tech has explained in a previous talk, come down from much higher regions. And rather than just going straight down into the plains, they like to be on the top of mountains. There may also have been at one time a military reason, because it was much more warlike in the 18th and 19th century, and it was easier to defend a mountain village. Next. This is looking up at the village from below. And again, you can see that the houses are pretty substantial. The Gurungs, compared to other Nepali groups at that time, were rich, because they were one of the main recruiting groups for the Gurkhas, obviously. And in fact, in the middle, you can see something I hadn't noticed before. You can see a group of people in white, very small. That's in front of the day school or night school, and our house was next to that. Next. this is our house. We asked where we could stay, and someone said, well, Colonel or Lieutenant I.B. Gurung, who's away in the army, has an empty house, and I think you could stay there for a few weeks. And we stayed there for a few weeks, and then they said, well, you could stay a bit longer. And so we stayed there the whole time, the whole 15 months we were in Tak. You can see the house on the right and the night school in the distance. And you can actually see some of the people who may be watching this in the picture, but it was a shock to come to a Gurung house from our English background. To begin with, you slept on the ground floor and not upstairs as you would in England. Secondly, there was no chimney, so the house was just filled with smoke all the time when you were cooking. And of course, there was no electricity, no running water, nothing really, just the house. Though it was a very cozy little house owned by I.B. Gurung, with his mother living in the house next door. Next. One of the which isn't often talked about by anthropologists is how you actually survive, because you have to learn the new skills. Cooking on a wood fire, for example. This is my wife, Jill, with Rupa Gurung, IB's daughter on the left, sitting next to me there. And every evening we'd cook like this. And the evening meals are one of the big social times, traditionally with the Gurungs, as you know. So every evening, lots of children and adults would come into our house, crowd around like this and watch us. And it was pretty difficult because we're used to very private life in England. Suddenly to have people sitting there talking in a language you don't understand, commenting, laughing at what you're doing. So it's a bit of a shock, a huge shock, in fact. But Jill coped, and this is towards the end of our time because she's wearing a Gurung, or at least a Nepali dress, which she didn't do at the beginning. So we had to learn how to buy, cook, and all the other things you do in a Gurung village. Next slide. In the evenings when they came in, luckily I'd brought my guitar with me, and I'd been quite keen and had a little guitar group when I was at school. So I knew some Western songs and so on. And so we used to sit round and sing songs. It was very strange going back in 1986 for the first time after 15 years. And in the evenings, people again came into our house, and they came in and they started singing, "Hey Lordy, pick a bale of cotton," "Hey Lordy, pick a bale of hay," which is the songs we had sung together 15 years earlier. And so I had the imagination that one day another anthropologist would come to the village and wonder how these people had picked up Western folk songs in this village. But that's the reason. Anyway, music is very important to the Gurungs. So being able to play an instrument and singing along with the Gurungs was, I think, very important. Next. This gives you a sense of the view from Tak. Absolutely wonderful underneath Annapurna 4 with the village of Siklis, the big village you see in the far distance on the slope. And another 3 or 4 hours at least walk from here. And Jill and I are going off with our washing. We went off every week. We went off just both to wash and also to have a little bit of privacy, because one of the most difficult things for a Westerner to come into a Gurung village is the absence of any privacy. The doors are always open for people to come in. People are always interested in what you're doing. Even when we went off to have a wash and a shower, often people would try and come with us because they felt we really needed company. But this was the Sunday walk, and we'd have one small piece of chocolate and as a special treat. Next. This is the center of the village, the water tap. And of course, there was no proper water supply. You often had to wait several hours to get your gowri filled. And this at night was the meeting place, we were told, of the witches. And I'll talk more about them soon. Next. Another shock. Remember, we had no language. We didn't understand a word of Gurung because there was no Gurung dictionary or anything we could have learnt from. So we were, but 3 days after we arrived, we were beckoned to come down to a village below Tak. And they said something was going on there. So we went down and we were thrown into this huge crowd of people doing strange things, dancing around and doing various rituals. I had no idea what it was, but it turned out to be one of the most important Gurung ritual, the Pue or Pue Laba, the 3-day memorial ritual that the Gurungs have. And one of the things that happens as an anthropologist is that the first time you see something like this, it's a complete bedlam. You don't know anybody, you don't know what's happening. We went to a number of these, and by a year into our fieldwork, of course, we knew the people, we just had some idea of the structure of what was going on. Anyway, it was here that I first drank pa, or rakshi, and I remember sitting in the dark, feeling absolutely woozy because I didn't realize how strong it was. But a drink of pa every evening was one of the pleasures of being in a Gurung household. Next. What you do, obviously, is gather as much information as you can about the people. Very difficult working conditions. It took me 5 months, back again, took me 5 months to get this table made in the village by the local carpenter. So that was a big step forward. So I sat upstairs and took my field notes and so on. Next. We were very young. I was 27 when we went, and Jill 26. So it was my first real adventure away from England, apart from small travels, and a big shock. Next. What made it easier and made a huge difference was that within 2 or 3 days of arriving, the evening after we arrived, someone came in with a torch. The man on the top left came in with a torch, shone it around our little room and said, "How are you?" And I was amazed. Here was someone speaking English. And he said, "Well, my name is Lieutenant Bowen Singh Gurung. I've been to England several times." So we started talking about London and the underground and so on. And he became my father. He said, "I'm going to adopt you as my son." That's Nandalal, his son on the right there. And so you are part of our family. So we did the little ritual to adopt me. That meant that I treated all his family as my family. I called him Abba. I'd call his wife below Amma. I'd call his children Nani, Moili, and so on and so on. And indeed, the relationship became ever stronger. In the, sadly, a few years later, Nandalal, his son, was killed or died in the army. And so in a way, I became his proto-son. So that when he did his funeral and his wife did their funerals, I attended and was a chief mourner in them. But they shielded and helped and occasionally helped us over various crises of shortage of money and so on. So I owe a huge amount to Bowen Singh Gurung and his family, who have remained close friends, and particularly to his brother's adopted daughter. His brother died, and so Dilmaya Gurung, who you see there, about 16, I'll talk more about later, in white, changed my life more than almost anyone. On to the next. My chief informant at that time, who I worked with most closely, was someone about my own age, Prem Bahadur Gurung. who you see here making a rain shield. Prem had good English and very intelligent. He was the son of the local Podju or shaman, and we became very close friends. And a lot of my talk will be about friendship, because that's the way you learn about another society. So Prem was enormously important and helped me greatly. And I kept in touch roughly. Next. And so when I went back on one of the later trips in the 1990s, there is Prem, who had moved to Kathmandu and then back to Pokhara, may even be watching this, and if he is, I wish him all happiness and many, many thanks for all his work. So Prem was one of the people who really taught me about Gurung society. Next. Next door was Iby's mother, and here she is. And she's, as you see, weaving, and the old skills of the Gurungs in weaving and making basket work and so on were very alive at that time, though many of them, of course, have partly died out now. Next. Prem's father, Ujjay Singh Gurung here, was one of the leading shamans or Podju of that area. And gradually, although he didn't speak English, as my Gurung began to improve after about 6 or 8 months, he and I began to work closer together. My study was about economics and population, but I could see how interesting and important the Gurung rituals and myths were, the Pue Lu Sang. And so I began to work with him, and he would come in every day and we'd spend an hour or two, and I would try and write down an account of and myths. And here he is with all his equipment. Next. Another shock and an interesting story was that Pied, in his wonderful book on the Gurungs, had captured much of it, but he'd made one big mistake. He'd said, the Gurungs don't believe in witchcraft, in Boshi. I don't know why he said that, but I can understand perhaps, because when I asked about witchcraft, because I'd done my PhD or my DPhil in England on English witchcraft in the 17th century, that was my historical PhD, and so I naturally asked about it, and they said, oh, no, we don't have any of that. But by chance, the proofs of my book, which was published shortly afterwards on witchcraft, came out when I was in the field, and I was going through them, and Prem said, what's that? And I explained, and I said, well, you know, you won't quite understand because this is a thing called witchcraft, which you don't have here. He said, what do you mean? And so, of course, the Gurungs traditionally did believe in witches, Boshi, and there were about 15 known supposed witches in Tak at that time, and this was one who was supposed to be a witch. Of course, most people don't believe in witchcraft now, but anyway, at the time she was supposed to be a witch. Next. Two of the little boys in the village, Kamal Bahadur Gurung and Sarvajit Gurung, who were about 13 and at school, were among my best informants, because they'd come in every evening for hot chocolate and so on, and we would talk about what they'd be doing in the day. Very intelligent, very nice boys. And so I was delighted many years later when I went back to discover that Kamal had gone to Bombay, and we met him there. We went down and stayed with him in Bombay. But he then came to the village, and here he is. So this is a reunion after 35 or 40 years with one of my close friends, who was then aged 13 when I knew him. Next. Another very important person was a man called Brikaras Gurung, who was a very senior member of the village. He'd been crippled and unable to leave, and he knew the village very well. And in particular, he had the village taxation and land records, the tirij and others, in his house, or got them there. And so, as I was very interested in reconstructing land ownership for the last 50 or 80 years, I'd walk down. It was quite a long, steep walk, about an hour down or a little less, to his house. And every day for some months, we'd work together on these land records. His son, A.K. Prasad, also became my teacher. He was the schoolmaster in the village. And his younger brother, Chandra Prasad, became the health worker there. So the whole family were very helpful. Next. You may have got some idea that it's both very rewarding and also extremely stressful living in a Gurung village. We were very lonely. We were quite often sick, particularly my wife, homesick. It was very tough, one of the toughest experiences in my life. And I was, for some of the time, I was counting the hours until I'd be back in libraries and with my friends and with hot baths and all the rest of it. So it was rather strange that at the end, after 15 months there in January 1970, when we had to leave, it was one of the most painful, sad experiences of my life. I remember feeling absolutely upset. The Ujay Singh, the Pochu, came in and did a ritual over me, which calmed me, but both my wife and I were terribly upset. And now thinking about it, it's obvious that we've become so part of this warm, meaningful community that leaving it was really difficult. And here they're saying goodbye to us. And they said, come back soon. And we said, we'll come back soon. But it wasn't soon enough. Next. Because I went back to England, I wrote my book on the Gurungs, Resources and Population, which came from my PhD. I got a job as a lecturer in anthropology at Cambridge. I remarried and thereby got 2 young daughters with my second wife, Sarah. And we couldn't really get away until they were old enough, until they were 16. Next. But we did some work on the Gurungs. I'd done a translation with Jill of Bernard Pignier's book, The Gurungs, which you can get in Kathmandu or elsewhere from Ratna Pustak. And then Sarah and I retranslated it. And that book, plus mine and plus 1 or 2 other things, mean that the Gurungs are one of the best written about societies, Messerschmitt's book and so on. One of the best recorded in published books, ethnic minority groups in Nepal. Next. When we did go back, it was 1986, so 15 years later, and we went back, and I went with Sarah, and I said, well, let's just go back. They'll all have forgotten me, and we'll just go for a couple of weeks, and I'll show you what it was like. Anyway, of course, when we went back, they hadn't forgotten us. Everyone said, oh, where have you been? We were waiting for you, etc. And Bowen Singh, and I met IB and Gurung, who I'll explain in a minute. So it was so warm and welcoming, and Gurung life was so interesting that Sarah, at the end of 2 weeks, said, I'm not leaving unless you promise to come back again next year. So I, of course, said, yes, we will. And we did come back next year. And both times we'd stayed in a Gurung house. But after those 2 times, they said, well, if you're going to come back often, why don't you build a little house yourself? So we built this little house, or had it built, in a courtyard of Bowen Singh's stepdaughter or adopted daughter, Dilma's house. And so we were in a Gurung courtyard. We had a separate place where we could sleep and I could work peacefully. So it was an ideal arrangement. And that house is still there. And if you ever go to Tak, you can visit it. Next. This is just to show you us dressed up in rather formal Gurung costume about this time, 1988, with Indra Bahadur Guru, my uncle, on the left, and Badra Singh, my second adopted father, on the right. And you'll hear more about Indra Bahadur in a minute. But normally, I wouldn't be dressed like this, but Sarah did take the trouble in Gurung or Nepali costume, which was very much appreciated. Next. Obviously, what you have to do as an anthropologist is to forget your own beliefs and religion and so on, and enter into the spirit of the place you go to. So when I hurt my finger, my thumb, and went back to Tak, I consulted the Danaram, the local, one of the local healers. And here he is trying to heal my finger. Unfortunately, it didn't work. So when I went, he said, send me a postcard if it doesn't work. But of course, he doesn't read and there was no post, so I couldn't do that. But when I went back, I said, why didn't it work? And he said, oh, well, the chicken you gave me was too small. It's probably true. Anyway, you actually participate in the belief system of the society, which I was doing here. The National Health Service hadn't managed to cure it, so it might have worked, but it didn't. Next. Anthropology's method is participant observation. You participate in a society and you. So Sarah and I did a little of each thing: wood carrying, wood chopping, carrying water, and here doing some hoeing in the fields with Dilmaya on the right. What you learn from this, there are two great advantages of this. One is that people see that you're not a snooty Westerner who thinks manual labor working in the fields and so on is below you, so you're quite prepared to do it. But they realize very quickly, and you realize very quickly, that you can't do it. You're not strong enough, it's too difficult. And just 1 minute of doing this in the hot sun was more than I could take. And I began to appreciate the hugely difficult work of Gurung life in the fields as it was traditionally then. Next. As I mentioned, you learn I learned everything I know about the Gurungs really from people. And Badra Singh, who I've mentioned before, my second adopted father on the left here, was one of those people. If you're very fortunate, as I was, you meet 2 or 3 people who know Gurung society or the society really well. And Badra Singh, who had lived in the village their life, he'd been crippled and couldn't move out. So he'd stayed there and he'd made a study of it. He was a kind of anthropologist. And so he knew everything about the village, really. So I could sit here and make notes. I could travel around the village in my mind with him. And he would say, well, in this household, there's so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and they have 3 oxen, 10 chickens. He was away in the army last year. Their income is this, and so on and so on. So he knew everything. And he also knew the deeper side of Gurung life, which people didn't normally talk about. So after some years, and once he got to trust us, he told us the secret history of the village. That is, the real relationships between people, what really happened, as well as his knowledge of the history. So we have all this. I have it all in my computer in a database, but of course, much of it is very confidential. And one of our problems is to know what to do with this material So it's neither lost nor becomes a danger to any living individuals. But Bhadra Singh was a fountain of knowledge. Next. The other way you learn about a society is not from the old and the wise, but from the very young and friendly. And here we have a very important person in my life, Prem Kumari Gurung. Now, Prem Kumari Gurung was my sister Dilmaya, who you've heard about, Bowen Singh's daughter. So Bowen Singh's granddaughter, Prem Kumari. And I knew her from about the age of one, just a little bit older than this, about 2. And I made a film record of her life. So I've got many hours of film of her and her mother interacting, which I later did with my own granddaughters. And I watched her grow from 2 to 10 or 12. We were very, very close, and she was a great help and informant. Next. For example, when Sarah was trying to learn Gurung, one of her main teachers was Kumari, as you see here, trying to teach her how to pronounce Gurung words. Next. And sharing things. Here, Sarah is with Prem Kumari watching a ritual, and they could discuss it and share the emotions of watching a ritual. Next. One of the things you have to learn, which luckily I didn't find too difficult, is to be a child again, or to be foolish. If you're in a Gurung society, you have to be playful. And so you see me here dancing with the children. So I was always prepared to dance or sing or enter into things, because I'd done this all my life in various ways. And it was a great pleasure to share the life of children. Of course, children have more time and often more patience than adults who are busy. And so we learnt a lot from young children, particularly the early time of learning the language. Next. You have to see the world you enter from very, very inside it. And I like this picture because this is me filming a ritual I'll talk about in a minute, the Gato Sheba, a very famous 3-day dance of the Gurungs. And this is the actual angle I'm taking at. So I'm participating and observing. I'm participating because they're doing the final dancing over our head with a bowl with some rice in. And this girl is dancing over my head, but I'm also observing, in other words, filming at the same time from this angle. Next. I've talked about Dilmaya from time to time, and she was probably the most important Gurung for me. She was 10 years younger than me. And I'd known her when she was 16, and then again when we went back. And we made our house in her courtyard. And so we spent from 1988 to 1995, some 7 years, every year we went back. And I filmed her relationship with her daughter, but also her wider life, and got very, very close to her. She was my sister, and we treated each other as brother and sister. Very intelligent and charming and helpful person. I think you've had a talk about Nepali Amma, and she was a kind of Nepali Amma. The closeness of the relationship is shown in this little bit from a film. My wife Sarah used to wash Prem Kumari, Dilmaya's daughter's hair, to wash my hair. Now, 99% of societies, there's no way you could ask a married woman, particularly as an outsider and as a white person and so on, to wash your hair. It's a very intimate thing. But she said, of course. So she washed it, and you can see her laughing because she said, you haven't got much hair to wash. But anyway, she washed it. And this is a sign of the sort of closeness and the lack of distance which we managed to establish. Next. Even closer at the annual Baitika festival, where sisters bless their brothers. She's blessing me and Sarah on my left. And she, as part of this, as you may know, you actually feed, the sister feeds the brother. Here she is actually feeding me. Now there's nothing much more close than being fed in the mouth like this by another human being. And so we were really, really very close. Next. Here she is when I was filming her, because one of the things I fortunately did in 1990 make films, which have been translated by Anita Gurung, who's helping with this broadcast. And they are an overview of a Gurung woman's life, all her dreams, her hopes, her fears, what she does, and so on. Very frankly spoken to me in 20 minutes, 12 of them or 10 of them. And I'll explain later how you can see this if you want to. And so one of my many plans is to write a book about her. I have written it, but I haven't yet published it, which would be a very unusual study of a Gurung woman. Tragically, in 1995, I suddenly got a message to say that she died. She was only 42, but she'd been working very hard and had a heart attack. She had a weak heart. And so her death was more powerful and made me more unhappy than any other. Sorry? Can you see this? So, shall I go on? Yep. So this is the memorial which the family put up for Dilmaya. And you can see this when you go into, as you enter Tak, you'll see this plaque, which is there, the memory of her. So, shall I go on? Yep. Next. So this is... Next. The day she died, which was the 7th of April, 1995, we planted this little tree. It was a small tree then, Cotinus, in our garden. So we knew it as the Dilmaya tree. Sadly, it died 2 or 3 years ago and had to be cut down. But this was a memory of a very, very important and helpful person in my life, Dilmaya Gurung. Next. In 1969, I went to Kathmandu and found that they were selling video cameras. This was the video camera I bought in 1969. And very, very simple. The films were 3 minutes. There was no zoom, no sound, etc. But at least I had it. And I took films in 1969, which are up on the internet, as I'll explain at the end. So there is some visual record of that village then. It was partly influenced by the fact that my supervisor, Führer Heimendorf, was a great filmmaker, perhaps the greatest anthropological filmmaker of all time in terms of the width of his filmmaking. And so I was encouraged to take photographs, films, recordings. And so this was the beginning of filming Tak. Next. 1987, the Japanese had brought out proper video cameras, not this one, but Video 8, which was lower quality. And this was a revolution. I mean, now you had an hour of film, much cheaper, with a zoom lens and sound. And then in 92, a better one, High 8. And my main filming was done on this particular camera, a High 8 camera. And I have made this video record of a life in a Gurung village, particularly from 88 onwards, which I think is unique. Hundreds of hours of film, which are, some of them, available to you. Next. This is just the earliest film, TARC 69, just on my computer. And these are just clips of TARC 1969. I think I've got, I don't know, 10,000, 12,000 film clips on TARC over the time. In 1992, for example, made about 30 hours of film in TARC. And all this is going to be preserved and I hope available for future generations of Gurungs. Next. One of the places it's on is on YouTube. And I'll give you at the end, if you pause it at the end and want to take a photograph of the screen, I'll give you the URLs, the links to where these films are available. But they're available on YouTube. If you search for Ayabaya, is the name my grandchildren gave me, and is my YouTube channel. So there are a whole lot of Gurung films there. Next. And they're also on the Cambridge University website, the streaming media service. I'll give you these links at the end. So you see a whole lot of films, 93 films on field work with the Gurungs, 132 films made in my first field work, and so on. So masses of film material. Next. One of the things that I learned from the Gurungs was about hard work. The Gurungs, as you saw, and as I'm sure you know, live on the side of very steep mountains. And this is looking down from TARC to the river, the Modikola. And the rice fields are down at the bottom, then the maize fields, and then the village. And you have to do this agriculture on this very steep slope. And of course, there's no way of getting the grain, for example, from the fields up to the village, except carrying it. So you're on your back, you're carrying huge weights, which I couldn't even lift, again and again and again. All the farming is done more or less by human labor with some oxen, obviously, and so on, but very little input of anything non-human labor. So it's really tough. And how the Gurungs did this on the diet which they had at that time, the Gurungs and the others in the village, the tailors and blacksmiths and so on, is really a mystery to anthropologists. I had a biological anthropology interested friend, Simon Strickland, who was also an anthropologist, and he did a study of Gurung diet. And there's no way you can see how on the diet they could have had the energy to do this, and yet they did. Next. This was brought home to me. I lived as a young person in the Lake District in the north of England. And that was where the steepest mountain in England, called Scarfield Pike, was. And in the bottom part of the diagram, you can see the steepest mountain in England, 3,200 feet, from the lake up to the mountain. And if you compare the angles, which I climbed up and seem very steep to me, with TARC angles, you go from the river to the village, you can see it's steeper than anything of any British mountain. And then if you go on up to the jungles higher up, it's a hugely difficult slope you're farming on. And of course, there's no way any European farmer or anything could farm and make any living from this sort of rocky hill mountain. Next. Another shock and thing I learned from the Gurung, and probably one of the most important, I was brought up as a Christian and as a Protestant Christian. And as such a person and my world in the West, we believed that religion was something you were of a certain religion. You were a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or whatever, and that you believed in one God, and all other faiths and so on you couldn't believe in. You couldn't both be a Muslim and a Christian, for example, and you couldn't be a Muslim and a Buddhist. So religions were exclusive. So when I went to Tak, that's how I thought the world really operated. Of course, when I arrived, I found that the people in Tak weren't like that. To begin with, they were Hindus, or at least they did many Hindu rituals and pujas. Here they are doing the big annual sacrifice of animals, sacrificing a buffalo. And next, they were also Buddhists, although this isn't traditional Buddhism. I've got films of Buddhism, but this is the other sort of religion they had. This is pre-Buddhist Bonpo religion of Tibet, before Buddhism arrived. These are the Klevri priests. So they were Hindus, they were Buddhists, they were Bonpo. Next. And of course, they believed in a huge world of spirits and so on, which anthropologists call shamanism. So they had shamans, and here is Ujjay Singh and his son in a shamanic ritual, and as a poju. They also believed in ancestors, and they also had other kind of spirits. So they had about 5 or 6 different, what I would had to call religions at the same time. How could you do this? Completely strange. Later, when I went to Japan and went to China, I found great civilizations doing the same thing. And I realized it was me who was strange in the West, having a single God and a monotheistic religion. But this was one of the great shocks of going, and what I learned from the Gurungs. Next. Another shock was, for the first time, to encounter people going into trance. That is, leaving their bodies and their spirits going off into another world. And this is one of the great ritual dances, the Gato Sheba, 3-day dance, which is danced a little bit in remote Gurung villages, but I've got quite a bit of film of it. In the daytime, you would dance the Gato. In the evening, if you were fortunate, you might get to see the night dance, which is the Kusun. I won't explain it, but the Kusun dance is very different. And here you have young girls, next, going into trance and dancing. They're inhabited by strange spirits. And Gurung girls are normally very gentle, peaceful, kind, and so on and so on. But when the Kusun Dyota comes into them, they become very different. Next. And they dance for a while, but if anyone says the word buffalo, shouts out buffalo, they go mad, they go berserk. They start waving their arms around, beating people, as you see this girl is about to do, maybe trying to take their clothes off. Completely, they have to be calmed down and taken out of the trance. I can't put this film up because the rhythms that are played may be dangerous. So I can just show you slides of this very strange Kusun dance. Next. The biggest ritual is the 3-day memorial, Pue Lava. And again, there's a lot of analysis. I've done a lot of analysis and film of this, which you can watch. At Dilmaya's memorial, we went back for it. And as I was her brother, and therefore Sarah was sister-in-law, we had to partake centrally in the rituals. And here Sarah is combing with Dilmaya's comb the sheep. It's believed that the spirit, of course, goes up to the land of the dead, the Planasa. And to do this, they come down into the village, and Dilmaya's come down into the village and gone into this sheep. And another sheep, the friend of this sheep, will also go up to the land of the dead. So Sarah's combing Dilmaya's hair there, and they're showing Dilmaya her face in a mirror. This is Dilmaya's mirror, and the sheep looks in it and sees herself as Dilmaya. But what is really extraordinary next is that it's believed that after having a huge feast, the sheep eat all sorts of biscuits and sweets and all sorts of things for a while, and then they go off and they have their heads cut off. And I was told that when they take out the stomach, all the things they've eaten have disappeared. There's no food in it, no sweet wrappings, no orange peel. So Tek Gurung, who's involved with this meeting, and I'll talk about later, went off and filmed this and photographed it. And here you see the stomach being examined. And indeed, he tells me there was nothing in it, no food. So how do you explain that? Next. Equally or even stranger, and I don't know how many of you have seen these, but Yajung Gurung, who is a very well-known Pochu and very learned Pochu, who is on the right, more or less, the third from the left, was doing a ritual in Yanjakot, and a young man from an English university went and photographed this, and he came to see me with some photographs and said, Alan, can you explain my photographs? I don't understand. So he projected them on the wall in our department. And photograph number 20 was like this: the shamans in the middle of a very long, complicated and important ritual, summoning witches or dead spirits down. Photograph number 20 was like this. Next. Photograph number 21, a few seconds later, was like this. And you see all these lights. When I showed this to Yajong, who actually walked in a few minutes afterwards, he said, "Good heavens." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Those are my spirits. That's what I see in my trance. The long line above me is my God protecting me. Other lines are my ancestors coming down to defend me. And other lines are witches attacking me, the three kinds of spirits I see. And that's exactly what I see in my trance, but it's come out on a photograph." So I sent this back to Kodak, or I sent a copy, and they said they couldn't explain it. And I showed it to an expert on paranormal phenomena, and they said, well, it could be the lens had stuck or something like that. But the chance of it happening at that particular point in the ritual is millions and millions to one. So another thing the Gurungs introduced me to was the fact that there may be other worlds than those which I've conceived of, parallel worlds. So I keep my mind open on these matters. Next. I also saw for the first time a dead body, and a dead body being burnt, which is happening down by the river here. And that is quite a shock for someone from the West who hasn't encountered death head on. And so I learned a little bit about important things in life, like death. Next. Then I came back, and of course all my visits to Nepal were punctuated by months in Cambridge. This is my college in Cambridge, King's College, Cambridge, which I hope some of you have visited and will visit. My room is in the white building on the right, and this is the famous chapel. So I lived in two parallel worlds myself, just as strange as other parallel worlds. When I was in Cambridge, the Gurungs and Tak seemed like a dream, and when I was in Tak, this seemed like a dream. Next. And of course, the task now was to make sense of all the material we were gathering after fieldwork, 20 trips we have made to Tak, I have made to Tak. And you can see some of the fieldwork notes on the desk there behind the computer and the others elsewhere. So how do you process all this huge amount of information? We fortunately had been setting up databases, so we have everything in a multimedia database so that you can find any date or any film or anything there. But of course, it took a huge amount of work, and this is my library in Cambridgeshire. Next. One of the people who helped me sort it all out was Indra Bahadur Gurung, Lieutenant I.B. Gurung, who I'm delighted is participating in this meeting and is here online from Hong Kong. He's my sort of uncle, distant uncle, and he and I worked together. He's a great expert on Gurung history and helped me understand that a great deal. And we had various projects together, which enriched my life enormously. Next. One of them was to write a book together, a guide to the Gurungs, which is this is the cover of the little book we wrote together, just published by Ratna Pustak in Kathmandu. Next. The more important was that he suggested that Gurung culture was dying out, much of the knowledge and shamanic traditions were dying out. So this needed to be saved. So we had a meeting of many of the Pochu and Clavery in Pokhara, the 1990s. And from that meeting, thanks to the donations and help of many Gurungs around the world, he raised the money to build a Koimbo, a very important Gurung cultural center, museum, and also religious center. And it was designed by IB, I believe, with these kedu, which are at the corners, which are taken from a Gurung ritual. So it has a very distinctive, interesting design. And next. This is more what it looked like when it was finished. And then there was another big building for other activities next door. And so if you go to Pokhara, I hope you'll visit this and support it in whatever way you can, because it's a very, very important institution, which has also spread to other parts of Nepal. And I think is one of the origins of the Tamu Lusang organizations around the world. So IB Gurung is really one of the central people who've helped to preserve and save Gurung culture, and I thank him for that. Next. Another person who helped me more in my general knowledge of Nepal and its history and culture was Colonel John Cross, who you see here, who also may be watching this. I hope he is, and if he is, I send my warmest greetings to him and Buddhiman and his family. John Cross knows Nepal better than almost anyone has ever known it. He speaks Nepali perfectly, and he's lived there for many years and is a Nepali citizen and a multilinguist, and has written and published many books. And so meeting John each time we went to Pokhara has been a great delight, and I'm glad to hear he's still walking many miles every day and looking at people in that enigmatic way. Next. Another person who helped greatly was Shana, or Bikash Gurung, who is the youngest son of Dilmaya, and who acted as our field worker assistant in our later years and helped us in many ways. And so we've had projects with Shana, who also I hope is watching this from Pokhara with his family, to whom I also send warmest greetings. Next. Another person is also watching this and involved in it is Tek Gurung and Anita, his wife, who you see here praying at Kokuno Lake, Xinjiang Lake in northern China. And he talked about this in a previous lecture, so I won't go into it, but this is the origin of the Gurungs are around this lake. So it's been a great privilege to remain friends with my former student, Tek Gurung, who did his PhD in China and has made a huge contribution to our understanding of the early history of the Gurungs. Next. Of course, many other Gurung family. Dilmaya's sister, Kaji, was my sister, and Kaji's daughter here, Manu Gurung, is with us here at a Tamu Pierre Lusang meeting in London, or near London recently. So the Gurung community in England is important. Next. And also around the world. The other little boy who was there with me was Servajit Gurung, and he's on my right here, a grown man in Hong Kong with Gurungs from Hong Kong. Next. With Shana, or Bikash, as I mentioned, we set up he set up a trekking company. And if this talk has interested you and you have a chance to go to Pokhara, you couldn't do better than to get in touch with Dilmaya Treks and Tours. That's easy to remember, Dilmaya Treks and Tours. And Shana, because he knows my family and my history, has worked with us and knows Tak very well, speaks good English, runs different kinds of tours and walks up to the village along the old path if you want, which we did. So it would be a wonderful way to learn about what you've seen in these films, is to actually experience it by going with Shana up to Tak and beyond. Next. And recently he built a tented camp above in the place where the old Gurung village of Tak used to be. It moved down from here about 200 years ago. And this has wonderful views, and this would be the beginning of a great walk up through Tak forest and around the villages to the north. Next. When I retired in 2009, the first thing I did, of course, was to go back to Tak. And here is Sarah and I returning. I'm 67 at the time, and it began my retirement in a wonderful way, going back to the village. Next. And of course, going back to Kathmandu, another project with Tek Gurung. He translated a part of a book of mine, Letters to Lily, and this was launched in Kathmandu a few years ago. And you can see the launch party here. Next. If this talk has interested you, another way of following it up is I've written a book called Becoming an Anthropologist, which is an account of that first fieldwork with many photographs in it. You can download it from my website for free as a PDF. I'll give you the website at the end. If you go to Life, under Life, you will see the PDF as a free PDF, but you can also buy it on Amazon. And so this is the only account I know of what it's actually like to work in another part of the world as an anthropologist. So it's got all the letters I wrote home from the time and my diaries and everything, and films and photographs. Next. That's the website. So if you go to www.alanmacfarlane.com and look under Life on the top left, it'll give you that and other things which I'll mention. Next. These are the links. I hope you can see the whole of this, but you can see the films at YouTube there, and you could take a photograph of this or get hold of it somehow. You can go to Ayabaya on YouTube. You can go to the streaming media service. If you type that in, streaming media service Cambridge, and search for Gurungs, and go to my website, and you can either look under the projects where you'll find the Gurung projects, or you can look at publications, and you can find most of my articles and other things that I've written about as free PDF downloads. So there's a great deal to follow up on. I just want to end by saying thank you to all of you for watching this, and we'll have a few questions, I believe, and particularly to say what a great pleasure looking at the screen, seeing IB Gurung watching this from Hong Kong, Manu Gurung, all sorts of friends over the years. All of you are much younger than me, but looking back from the age of 78 to 50 years spent in another society is an enormous pleasure and privilege. I'll end with a joke. When I went to the Gurungs, I came to admire them hugely, as you can see. I've thought that they were the nicest people I'd ever met. They were warm, they were humorous, they were trustworthy, they were kind, everything that human beings should be. So I had a huge attraction to them. And I learned that they were just like me, that the Western idea that somehow people in other societies who have less education or less technology are less intelligent or less sensitive or whatever is complete rubbish. I was completely equal with Dilmaya, who was an uneducated village woman, as I was, and admired her as much as I did my colleagues in Cambridge, if not more so. So I really, from my experience, what I learned from the Gurungs was how wonderful human beings can be in different circumstances and how we are all one set of brothers across the world. That was my main lesson from the Gurungs. But when I told people this, they say, well, was there no downside to it? And I say, well, the fieldwork was difficult. The downside really is that there are so few Gurungs. There should be more of them. There are only about 500,000, and the world would be a better place with more of them. So that was the only negative thing I could think of. When I went to China, and I've been to China 18 times and go there every year, and made many, many Chinese friends, as I have Gurung friends, and many of them are young people. Many of them are students and colleagues. And I found them, many of them, of course, are ethnic peoples very similar to the Gurungs, but they're also the Han. I found their character very, very similar. They're kind, generous, warm, humorous, intelligent, rational people. And so now I can say, well, there are 500,000 Gurungs and 1.4 billion Chinese. So the world is going to be a better place soon when we forget about the Americans. And on that political note, I better stop before I launch out on anything else. But thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk, and to all of you for watching. And now over to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Now, Tech will lead the Q&A session.
Yeah, again, yeah, you have stopped sharing. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Professor Macfarlane, for giving such a wonderful talk today. Do you listen to me, by the way? Do you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Really great to having you today.
Pleasure.
Yeah, well, we are all really, I think, excited to hear, and there are probably many questions too. Before I read out questions, actually, I would also like to add few things in addition to what Dr. Gurung had already introduced to all of us today. Well, my introduction to Professor Macfarlane goes back to 1994 when I went to Cambridge University to do my MPhil degree under him. Actually, I'm really privileged, honored to be his student. And at the same time, I would like to also mention Madam Sarah Harrison, who has been the, driving force, engine behind Professor Macfarlane, and who has been always very helpful in terms of like really providing lots of lessons, guidance, and insights to me as well, which I am still continuing to learn nowadays. And in this connection, and also like to also reiterate one point that he had given us a task, particularly Anita, to translate the films he had taken with Dumaya, and those are like real great assets. And as he already said, there are so many things which we can, I think, utilize for Gurung research further. Without further doing, I think I would now like to also mention a couple of things that as a summary of his talk. Not you have already heard a lot, but what I felt is that he has given a huge chunk of information about these 50 years. I believe many of us were probably not born then, but those memories have been really, really important for all of us. That's one chunk of huge bit of information that we got. Another bit of information we got is that the way he became anthropologist, or he did research with Gurungs, so that I believe for all those young Gurung people, I think will be useful how he did his research in the past and how relevant even today are. So that's a second. And third chunk he had given is very importantly, all the lessons that he learned about how hardworking Gurung people are, how different kind of ideas he had before coming here, and how he changed entirely, a kind of a U-turn to understand the world. And at the end, he said that how wonderful people Gurungs are. I think we are very much flattered as Gurung people. Thank you, Professor Macfarlane, for all those really, really kind words. Beyond that, now I would like to read out a few important questions that are being put by some Gurung friends around. And probably because there are too many questions, so I may not read all them out, but maybe try to accommodate in a representative questions of many of them. Let me first, yes.
Can I just take 1 minute comfort break, as they call it?
Oh, sure.
1 minute.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Good morning, Sarah. Dr. Sarah Parker, how are you?
Namaste, home and everybody.
Namaste.
Dari sansai saya, dari खुसी लाग्यो एकदम ताकान सिक्लिस धेरै very similar.
Okay.
Lovely to see so many people here.
Right. So yes, Age has come back.
Yes, I have come back.
Yeah. So the first question I take is from Gehendra Gurung. I think you have already given so many important messages. His question is, what would be your top 3 messages that you like to pass on, say, to the new Gurung generation to preserve, protect their culture? That's first question. And the second question is, do you think Gurungs who have migrated to UK will be able to continue their cultural practices in their new country? And if so, how? This is the question by Mr. Gehendra Gurung. Please, again. Yeah.
Thank you very much. On preserving the culture, obviously one thing is to keep strong contacts with your Gurung family and friends in Nepal, and if possible, to visit wherever your village and area was, and see how life is there, and spend some time in Nepal. It's very easy to lose your roots, and therefore physical visiting and actually participating and going back is important. In terms of Gurung language, some Gurung parents of the older generation try to preserve the language, and if you can do that and learn some basic Gurung at least, that's very important. But I understand that, you know, it may not be easy to do that. But the third thing, and obviously do any research, join any Gurung organization that you can hear of. There are good ones in the UK and elsewhere, Tamu, Lusang and so on. So you can join organizations, you can read about your ancestors. And in terms of keeping up your cultural practices, I didn't talk about this, but one of the things that I've always been interested in is how societies retain their cultural identities through time and in different circumstances. As an English historian, I have always been amazed at how the English, for example, over 1,000 years remained the same English people in their basic ideas, concepts, and law and so on. And then when they went in the empire, I've studied my ancestors going to India from the 18th century, going to Jamaica in the 17th century, and so on. Wherever the English went, they remained English, as do the French and other people. What has struck me about spending time in Gurung households in the UK is that they remain Gurung. The one I know best has a little ancestor, a Poilu, in the corner of the room. They wear Gurung dress on particular special occasions. They sometimes eat with their hands and eat rice and traditional food. And the most important thing is that the family relations within a Gurung household is what really creates Gurunghood. The kindness of parents to their children, their treating of men and women as absolutely equal. Many things you learn from the moment you're born, how to respect older people. All those things which are central to Gurung culture in the education in the first 5 years or so are still being passed on, which is why when I visit Gurungs, whether it's in England or Hong Kong or Kathmandu or any other part, I feel I am with similar people to the ones who were in the village. They don't change because they're living in cities. And perhaps the Gurungs are particularly good at retaining this identity because, as Tech explained, they've had this long migration of history of thousands of years coming down from a lake where they were probably fishers and hunters down through Western China practicing different kinds of agriculture across Tibet as herders, coming down as forest dwellers, and then down into the rice, and then down into the army, and then down. So the Gurungs have, as a group, had thousands of years of being able to maintain their Gurung identity against any kind of challenge. And just because they now live in cities doesn't mean they stop being Gurungs. They're just as much Gurungs. They may not speak the language, but their character and deeper culture in many ways are the same. And I think will be maintained forever. But now that there are resources like the films I've mentioned and other things for you to see how traditional Gurung culture worked and learn about it through books and simple guides, then you can enrich what your identity is by learning about your own history and past. So that would be my advice, not to worry that it will be lost. It won't be lost, but you can, as it were, polish it up and make it richer by some effort.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer. And another important question is about your experience about translating Bernard Pinney's book. Would you like to just share why you had edited some of the materials and why you also thought some of the important things to be inserted, etc. So maybe that's an kind of experience of translating from French to Gurungs. So maybe that will give us some idea about translation to further research studies in Gurung community. So the question is raised by Krishna Guru and would like to have the experience of translating this Gurung document from French to English. Please.
Thank you. Well, first thing I should say is that I didn't really do the translation. I sort of supervised it and I did it a little bit. My school French was pretty basic and my spoken French not so good either. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. When I went to study Pignèd's manuscripts and his photographs, which are in an archive.
Okay, sorry, Agi, because of the technical hitch, we had some time lag. Anyway, now I think you were responding some of the questions already, or shall I read another question?
Well, the question was about translating.
Yes, experience. Yeah.
Pignèd. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad to see Sarah Parker there.
Yes.
Sarah.
She has a question too.
So what I was saying was that I didn't really do the translation of Pignèd. It was done originally mainly by Jill, my first wife, and then finished off by Sarah. And so she did the technical part. It was a very important book to translate because it filled in many of the things which I didn't manage to cover or knew that Pignèd had already covered about the social structure and so on. There were one or two things that he'd missed out, and that's why I put in a number of appendices on witchcraft and other things that he had not written about. And we also put in what turned out to be quite a contentious appendix about Gurung history by Bovar and Yajung. And this caused quite a lot of trouble because, as you know, particularly with small groups who are trying to maintain their cultural identity, there is a lot of dispute about what that identity is and who you are, and particularly what your history is. So history is something which is very politically alive for many peoples in the world. And that's no different for the Gurung. So I translated it, or we translated as accurately as we could. though it's worth just pointing out something which most of you won't know, which is that the book, because Pinnier died before the book was finalized, he just left a manuscript. And so it was edited and published by Louis Dumont, a great French structural anthropologist. And Dumont had his own ideas about the Gurungs, and particularly about their social structure. So there are some elements which are reinterpretations of Gurung culture, particularly the Jat system, the Sajat, the 4 Jats, Sorajat 16, or the Plegi and Kugi, which are, I think, not necessarily what Pinnier would have written, but putting his bits and pieces together, Dumont turned it into a much more, what should we say, Hindu-Indian model, because Dumont was a great expert on India, Hindu civilization, Homo hierarchicus. And therefore the central feature of the system, which is 3, Kugi and Songi, rather than Pligi, gets a bit overlaid in the published book, and particularly the chapter on social structure, which Dumont published. So that was something we didn't really correct at the time, but it's worth knowing. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, it led to some hard feelings on the part of some who had a different interpretation and didn't mind the book itself, but felt that 1 or 2 of the appendices were slanted in a certain direction.
So actually, so in that connection, there was probably a related question of Major Uday Bahadur Gurung, retired Major Uday Bahadur Gurung. So I think it's also related to how you have analyzed the translation of like the terminologies used for the Sogi Pligi Gurungs like Lama, Lamchane, Khalekotani into Lam, Lam, or Kon. So because why he is asking this question is he hasn't been able to find out really good analysis in that reference. So so in the connection of translation, perhaps you can also share some of your ideas about how these things could be seen in a historical perspective.
Well, the translation, as far as I know, was as exact as possible. So
right.
we didn't change any of Pinnier's words. If he said Kwanme, we put Kwanme. If he said Lamme or Lamchane or whatever, we put that. So there was no alteration, as far as I know, in that way. I'm not sure whether you're asking what my own interpretation is.
No, well, Uday Bahadur was asking whether these translations are really the kind of translation that appears to be in the book in a way.
Yes.
Okay.
Whatever was, I mean, it would be not too difficult to actually look at the French edition. I mean, it's quite difficult to get hold of, but there must be copies around, and to look at the French edition and see what the English edition are. As far as I know, I mean, I certainly wouldn't have, if it said Kwanme, none of us would have translated that as something else. So there was no, I mean, Sarah can confirm that, but we didn't make any substantive translation changes at all. And that's why, in fact, I did some footnotes and also appendices, because what you do when you translate is not to alter what the author wrote at all,
right,
but to add things. So you can see what my voice is. My voice is in the appendices and in some of the footnotes. It's not there present in the actual book itself.
Okay.
But remember one thing about, an important thing to remember about Pinnier he was just a hippie. He was just a wandering Frenchman in Kathmandu, young man wandering around the world. And he decided he wanted to do something serious while he was in Nepal. So he happened to meet Führer Heimendorf, my supervisor, said, you know, what would you advise? And he said, well, why don't you go and spend time with the Gurungs? And this is very early. This is, you know, early 60s. So he went to Moharia, and he didn't stay there very long. He was there about 4 or 5 months. And it's an extraordinary achievement for someone to write as detailed an ethnography as that on the basis of 4 or 5 months field work. He obviously learnt Gurung very fast and knew it quite well. He had an excellent fieldwork assistant, C.B. Gotane, and later I checked all the book with C.B. Gotane, and he seemed at the time happy with what we translated. He looked at it all. Later, maybe re-examining it or maybe talking to his friends, he felt that some of, perhaps not what I'd done, but some of what Pignade had done and what was in 1 or 2 of the appendices by other people weren't in line with what some of his friends thought. So there was some difference of opinion then. But I think I can assure you, Sarah's looking through the book at the moment near me, that nothing in the book itself, I mean, nothing in Pignade's text had to be changed or was changed at all. Now, that doesn't mean it's right, because, as I say, he wasn't there for long. He got it through the eyes of a pligi or songi person. In other words, through the eyes of C.B. Gotane.
Right.
And there's another famous book about the Himalayas, Hindus of the Himalayas, by Berriman. And if you're interested in anthropology, you should read the preface to Berriman's book, because there it's one of the few accounts of how your informant shapes what you see. Because what happened with Berriman was that he went in and he got an upper group informant and saw the society in one way, and then the informant had to leave and he got a lower group informant and he saw an entirely different society. Now, the fact that Pignade saw Moharia mainly through the eyes of C.B. Gotane gives it a certain slant. I didn't consciously, but by chance, my friends in Tak were of both the Kugi and Songi. So one of my fathers, Burn Singh, was Kepche, and from the Kugi, Badra Singh was a Kwanme, and therefore from the other group. So I saw Tak and the Gurungs through both sets of lenses, as it were. And it's important to try and do that as an anthropologist, and not just see it through one person's eyes. The other thing is that you should realize that there is maybe a bit of a shock to you, but there's no such thing as truth. In other words, you cannot have the final word on the Gurungs. There are different stories and myths and ideas, and none of them is absolutely true. And they've probably all got bits of truth. So those who think that the Gurung have a southern origin and those who think it have a northern origin, there are probably elements of both those, because if you look at the long ramblings and wanderings of people, they came to where they are in all sorts of different ways, and they are mixes of all sorts of different peoples. And therefore, you have to be tolerant about other opinions because they may contain some truth in them, and therefore it's not sensible to dismiss them entirely. So Gurung history is contested, but luckily, and thanks partly to your own work, Tech, it's now much more clear about what that history is. Here is the book, by the way. The Gurungs by Pignade, the French edition. And that's what we translated. And Sarah gave me the chapter 5 is the one which has been quite substantially altered by Dumont, called organization, the clan and hierarchical organization of the Gurungs. That is the Gurungs seen through the eyes of a French structuralist anthropologist, Dumont, as well as through the eyes of C.B. Gotani and Bernard Pinier.
Well, thank you so much. This is really insightful and really important for all of us to understand the realities of the Gurung people of Nepal. Thank you so much for those very insightful, very important thoughts for us. Well, thank you. And there are other questions related to witchcraft. There are two questions actually. One is from Mr. Gau Gurung and another is from Shara Parker herself. So Gau Gurung asks that, is there similarities in witchcraft in Western and Nepali Gurung societies? That's one. And maybe if I read Sarah Parker's question, then so you can answer both together. Sarah Parker is asking, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to read. Where is it?
Sarah is there, she can ask me.
Yeah, directly. Maybe Sarah, would you mind asking that way? Because I'm copying, pasting here. Yeah, well, yeah, and I can read. Were witches always considered to be negative, or was there a respect for their powers? And why has the belief in witches dies away when others with power and knowledge about rituals remain so embedded in the culture? That's Sarah Parker. So,
did you say why has knowledge of the witches?
Oh no, it's a
Alan. Yeah, just to clarify, you said that the belief in witches, that people don't believe in them as much anymore, but they still do believe in them. And are there cases of good witches as well as bad? Because you mentioned there was 15. So is it that in the 60s people would admit to witchcraft, but now it's more hidden because society sees it as being negative?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah.
Nice to talk to you. The first question, there are similarities between Gurung witchcraft and the witchcraft I studied in England for the 17th century. For example, I mean, the central feature of witchcraft is that it's a belief that certain people have inside them some evil power which comes from who knows what, and allows that person, either through saying certain spells and charms or doing certain things, or even just hating someone and wishing them evil, through that power they can harm them in some way or other. That is the core of witchcraft, supernatural power to affect other people, probably negatively. In that respect, Gurung witchcraft and English witchcraft are similar. But beyond that, there are obviously huge differences. English witchcraft and European witchcraft is within the context of Christianity, and I talked earlier about monotheism. It's within the context of a belief system which believes in a god and in an anti-god, or the devil, or Satan. So English witches have their primary power from the devil, from Satan. They are the devil's servants. So in some areas they form into little groups and called covens, and they worship the devil and so on and so on. There's none of that in Gurung witchcraft. They are single individuals. They don't form, they may, I suppose, know each other, but they don't have rituals and meetings and so on and so on. And that is a pretty big difference between them. English witches actually didn't fly through the air, though some of the European witches did. And therefore, the way in which Nepalese witches operated and so on, there are quite a lot of small and significant differences, but also great similarity. I'll just tell you a funny story, because two of the characteristics of witches when I was there first were, one was that they usually went around at night flashing lights from their fingers. And also they had armor, metal, underneath their clothes to protect them. And so they went around flashing lights and clanking. So I used to wonder why, when I went out at night to empty the toilet bucket with my torch, people would suddenly scream and disappear very quickly. And they obviously thought I was a clanking and flashing witch walking around the village paths. Anyway, so there are similarities and differences.
Yeah.
On Sarah's point, those 15 or so witches, of course, I knew who they were, and some of them seemed to me really nice people. I mean, all of them seemed nice people, but some of them really, some, as the old saying is, some of my best friends were witches. I really, you know, I wouldn't have known, of course. I couldn't understand why they'd chosen a perfectly friendly, nice, usually a woman, usually an older woman, in fact, all women, I think. But of those 15 or whoever the number there were, they were all considered bad, nothing good about them. In English witchcraft, European witchcraft, you have white witches and you have black witches. Black witches are the evil ones, and the white witches are basically like the Podju. They are the witch doctors. They are the ones who heal and protect you. So if you'd applied this in Tak, you have the black witches who are the Boshi. And then you have the people who protect you against witchcraft, and they are entirely separate people. So you can't be both at the same time. Though I suspect that some of the most powerful Podju were slightly feared as people who had great mystical power, and therefore you didn't really want to annoy them in any way. But they weren't witches in any stretch of the imagination. So there was no overlap in individuals in black and white.
Okay. Okay, another question is from Tara Gurung. She says that in the last 50 years, the village where you worked in Tak has actually gone to a lower scale of development or so. So in the context of coronavirus, probably the village may become vibrant again. In your opinion, how long will it take to bring back the village back to life as it was 5 decades ago? That's one question Tara Gurung has asked you.
Thank you, Tara. That's a very interesting question. I didn't really talk much about the change over those 50 years because of other things to say, but of course it is an absolutely extraordinary transformation. Even when I went back in 1986, it was changing a certain amount, but a lot of it was still there. The dancing, the singing in the evenings, the gato wasn't being done actually in Tak, even in 1986. But a lot of it was still there. And it stayed like that roughly until the Maoist period, 2002. And it was really that period, the 3 or 4 years of the Maoist rising, when the village changed hugely, because that's the first set of Gurungs leaving, left like IB and Boen Singh in the late 70s or in the 70s. And then the exit of the Gurungs really was during the Maoist period. So when we went back in 2006, the village had changed a great deal. A lot of the people had left. So that's the second big change. And then around, IB will know because he was involved in making the road to the village, but whenever it was, around 2012, something like that, when there was a road up to the village, when electricity reached the village, when mobile phones reached the village, and so on. In other words, during the last 10 years and probably the last 6, 7 years, the village again changed hugely. Most of the remaining Gurungs left, And now we haven't done a census for a few years, but I suspect that something like 90% or 80% of the people in Tak, in that area, are not Gurung now. They're either Brahmins, Chetris, blacksmiths, tailors, and so on. And the Gurung village itself is now inhabited. When I was first there, the idea that blacksmiths and tailors would be living in the central Gurung houses was more or less unthinkable, but that's where they are now. So the people have changed. And of course, in that way and in many other ways, the atmosphere has changed. So much of the social life is no longer. Another change was obviously in the agriculture, because a number of the fields, particularly in the more remote areas, went to banjo or went to just being overgrown. And so in some ways, it was developing as has happened all over Europe, in France and Italy and Spain and other places, where it changed into a suburb of a city. In other words, the inhabitants would keep their houses, but they would go back up for a festival or a funeral or something special. But life was in the city. And so this is how we found it in our last visit in 2017, where instead, just to give you a pen portrait, for many years we would go in the evening and sit by a wood fire with a little pochi burning, kerosene lamp. And in the early days, women would come in and start singing and dancing and so on. Later on, we'd sit around the fire and talk and so on. When we last went to the village, and we went for the evening meal in a neighboring house, and there was an electric light burning, so no longer a bocce. So it's just like a rather weak bulb. They were cooking on gas, so there was no fire. And of the 6 people sitting there, 4 of them were on their mobile phones for most of the evening, not talking to us at all. So it was basically like having supper in Cambridge. So the atmosphere, as far as we were concerned, had changed hugely. Now, the last part of the question is interesting, about whether COVID will bring back life to the village. I don't know. You'll have to tell me. Shana will have to tell me, if he's watching, whether this has happened, because he's been up in the village, has been quarantining, and he's just come down. So I hope he will tell me whether life is coming back to Tak or not. You'll only see it if you get there. I don't know. But the other thing that I'd hoped was that what happened in Europe is that the villagers left and deserted their villages up in the Alps and in the mountains, Pyrenees. They went down to the cities, but then they remembered their lives. So there was a partial remigration. In the summer, they would go up and they would tend just 1 or 2 fields and pick the vine, grapes and so on. And so there was some sort of social return and life in the village. The other thing is that as the pressures grow in Pokhara, many people may feel that if there's a really good road, and I gather the road to Tak is going to be much improved because it was falling to pieces. If there's a really good road and you can get up to Tak in 20 minutes, why not live in a beautiful mountain village? And if you have a job or work and you're not doing it on electronic communication, why not go down for work and live in the village or spend your weekends there? So these villages may pick up life but in a different way entirely, because the ultimate problem is no young person who has ambitions, who wants to be well educated, who wants to get a paid good job and then to marry and educate their own children, they cannot easily think of a future living in a mountain village. The work is too hard, too little paid, the facilities are too poor in education and so on. So the attraction of going out is too huge for people with any kind of energy and ambition to want to stay there. The blacksmiths and tailors do it by staying, but sending their young men to work. But then again, the closing up of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and so on through COVID may drive people back, and they are forced for a while to go back to the life which we saw. But I think it'll only be temporary.
Thank you so much. Well, I didn't read many names who had similar questions about transformation of village. I'm sorry for if I didn't pronounce your names, but I think in the whole, Professor Macfarlane has given answer to the transformation of the village and so forth. So now actually I have very limited number of representative questions now. One is about that in present time, there are many other non-Gurungs, religion, culture, festivals, and so on around the world. And Gurungs are migrating globally, and Gurungs are contacted with other religion and cultures, and even daily activities. How do you think about influences that affect or stop to preserve and promote the original and indigenous Tamu cultures, religions, and lifestyles? It's been asked by Ruk Tamu, Veg Gurung, and so many others. This is a representative one I just read. So again, your turn.
Thank you. Well, actually, it's really the same question as the first one I answered, which is how do you preserve Gurung culture, and will it be preserved, and identity? And I gave quite a long answer to that. One thing I'd add is that the Gurungs are, as I'd explained in relation to their many religious beliefs, they're extremely tolerant people. They are used to mixing different kinds of belief systems, so believing to a certain extent in Hinduism, Buddhism, shamanism, ancestors. And so they have no difficulty in living in pluralistic worlds elsewhere. They don't find it any threat to be living next door to a Christian or to anyone else, because they themselves are a mixture of all sorts of different beliefs and so on. And they've held these in balance. So they will deal with this situation in many ways better than many Westerners who are much more closed in their worlds and feel threatened by other belief systems. But as I said in the first part, I think that particularly because of the child rearing system and the way that young Gurungs are taught to interact with other people. I mean, something I didn't say in my talk, one of the things that I learned from the Gurungs was how good people who live in a very strong community, like the Gurungs, are at social relations. The delicacy of dealing with other people, how you are courteous and listen to people and treat people as human beings, whether they're children, whether they're old people, whether they're people from another group. That careful behavior within a community was immensely impressive. I've seen it sometimes at its best in communities that I belong to in the West, like a Cambridge college, but often it's not nearly as tactful and well-behaved as a Gurung village. Basically, in a Gurung village, you have to be very, very careful on what you say, what you do, where you go, because everyone knows everything you're doing. And if you say something negative about someone, it'll get back to them. Something that does happen in Cambridge too, and I had to learn. You have to be very careful because you don't know who's going to talk to who. And this makes the work of an anthropologist in a place like the Gurungs both much more exciting but more challenging, because every person you talk to, when I talk to Dilmaya, I talk to IB or Badra Singh, they know they are risking their life in that village by talking to you. Not just talking to you, that may be dangerous, but what they say, because if you then pass it on to the wrong person. So building up trust that what you discuss with one person doesn't go to another person. And one of the great pleasures we discovered was the way in which over time I trusted them and they trusted us sufficiently to tell us many things that they wouldn't even tell their neighbors or their other members of the family, because they felt that we would use it in the right way and not pass it on. So I've got off the question, which is about preserving Gurung culture, but I think I more or less answered it in the beginning. So you can, if you missed that answer, you can watch the recording. You're switched off, Tech.
Right. Yeah, there are, I think now only a couple of questions, but many thanks and best regards to you because of such a wonderful talk that you have given to our community here around the globe. One of the important questions here is, what are the differences you found or similar shamanistic practices in Chinese ethnic groups? Can those be compared with Gurungs? That's one. And the second is there any advice for the state intervention to revive Gurung villages? The first one is from Dr. Hong Gurung. The second one is from Sundar Gurung. Those are the two questions. I think with this, probably we have already crossed quite a lot of time. Perhaps we might want to, if Ivy Dai is happy to share some thoughts to this forum. Otherwise, I think we have quite a lot of time already spent. So I think these are the last two questions first, please.
Thank you. Well, on the Chinese shamanism, Pinade himself noticed a similarity between Gurung myths and rituals and priests in particular, and an account of the Nashi or Naki religion of Yunnan, which is an ethnic minority group in Yunnan. And you've been to this area, Tech, and I've been to it, and there are quite a lot of similarities in small things like dress and also in some of the rituals and so on. It's not at all identical, but there's enough of a similarity for one to feel that they have probably influenced each other. And your own work on the DNA of the Gurungs shows that that indeed is the case, that the Gurungs came down through that area, that there is Nashi and other Yunnanese blood in the Gurung DNA. And therefore, it's not surprising, because in many ways, the shamanism is a pan-Himalayan, pan-Asian phenomenon. You find elements of it in Japan, you find elements of it right across China, as well as in minority groups. And very often, it has a family resemblance. And a family resemblance means that the nose and the mouth are the same, but the eyes are different. In other words, they will beat on a one-sided drum, or their bits of the ritual language sound similar, or the beliefs about spirits have some overlap. So it's not identical, but there's a lot of overlap. And something I didn't say, but in relation, I've looked at some of the shamanism in the minorities in China and read a bit more about it. What is extraordinary, and this is a very important message for all of you young Gurungs, you are members of a group which has the finest, the best, the most important, the richest Pielu tradition, songs, myths in the world, or at least in the Himalayas.
Thank you.
Having looked right down through Burma, Western China, Sikkim, Bhutan, and all the Nepalese groups, insofar as I've read about them, like the Magars and the Rais and Limbus and so on, there is nothing nearly as important and rich as your tradition. I mean, I've never done the work, and someone needs to do the work, because I've got all the stuff I gathered on the myths and rituals, and Simon Strickland's published his. But if you added up all the rituals that have been documented, and there are many others that haven't, and looked at the myths, you'll find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of long, complicated rituals and myths were preserved over 2,000 years by the Gurungs coming down from northern China in their shamanic trip. And we're still alive in 1968 and still alive in remote parts of Nepal now, no doubt. And still, so as IB would tell you, there's still lots of work to be done, and particularly to make it all preserved forever. And in terms of what the government could do, we have talked, you and I, about a Gurung cultural center in Kathmandu. I think the government, when it becomes even richer than it is now and more organized than it is now, could well encourage, through some state support, Gurung cultural activities, both in Kathmandu, Pokhara and elsewhere, so that, for example, the Gurung Museum in Pokhara could well be refurbished properly, and that will be expensive. IB has had dreams and ideas on that for a long time. And that's the sort of thing which, not a huge amount of money, but some real state interest in, would make a big difference, just to value. Because if the government also is aware that there is no other group in Nepal, no other group in the Himalayas, which is as important ethnographically, and I mean in terms of anthropology and in terms of our knowledge of early shamanism, as the Gurungs, then perhaps they will step up and do something. Thank you.
Thank you so much. By the way, when there was some technical problem, at that time we had a little bit of talk about the contribution of Madam Sarah Harrison. We wonder if she is around and could be present to us.
She's here, and as you know, with Anita, the real powerhouse and the real
absolutely
who is the center of your world is Anita.
Yes. Yeah.
Hello.
Okay. Hello.
Hello. Well, you've entered my space because I was working on the other side of this table.
Thank you. Oh, wonderful.
Oh, lovely to see you all along the top of the.
Right. Yeah.
Fine. Is that there I am.
Thank you so much for coming, and that we all really appreciate your contribution to the Gurung community.
Well, the Gurungs have given me a tremendous amount of pleasure throughout my knowledge of them, which was from my mid-40s, I have to say. But it's quite a long time now, I can tell you. 30 years at least. Anyway, bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, I think with this, I would now like to hand over the mic to Dr. Hom Gurung, who would then, I think, conclude by thanking Professor Macfarlane and all the participants. Dr. Hom Gurung, floor is yours.
Hello.
Hello.
No sound.
Oh, Dr. Hom Gurung.
Yes.
Oh, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I think it has been a wonderful talk. Thank you so much, again. I think it's a historic, it's a unique, and we got in 50 years. So we have learned a great deal of wisdom, knowledge about the Gurungs, what we have learned from the Gurungs, and also we have learned lots about from you. So I think, yeah, so yeah, you just mentioned, it is always very good to see you in Nepali, Bhangra, and also what the Gurungs have in special occasions. So it was the privilege for each and everyone when you visit TAC, and many people really learn and always smile with the happiness. So one of the very important things, what I call the final reflections, when we had a chat about this talk, that I told you that my wife is from Chia village, TAC. And instantly, maybe after 20 minutes, I got this house, which belongs to my father-in-law. So when I married to Purna, my wife, about 33 years ago, there were about 40 goats, 50 chickens. It's a very lively. But today, when I go there, when you go there, it's almost empty. As you had just mentioned, now in Thak village, about 80% are non-Gurus. Despite it is just 1.5 hours drive from Pokhara, but the migration is still there. So as part of our preparation of this talk, a few days ago, I contacted one of our daughters who was born in Hong Kong and now in UK. So a daughter of ex-Gurkha. So I try to link the different generation that can understand how we Gurungs were migrated all the way from inner China or Mongolia, that Tek has already proven from his thesis, took about 800 years. Then came to from Kolas Sothar like about 1500 ago. So now within the next from the last 50 years that you've been to Thak, and now after 50 years, then our peoples are now, they are like migrating from different countries. So like the daughter who was born in Hong Kong and now in UK, she was very smart. I think she was one of the 10 students out of 10,000 students in UK who did a very good, excellent in Asia writing. So I try to understand how our generation are evolving in terms of getting to know our culture, how they can transform and how they can take the lead in the future. I think I can see there are some mixed opportunities and challenges. The opportunities, because now they can see the entire world. So the challenge for the parents, I think for many parents in UK, because the parents were born in cities, in the villages, so they went to Hong Kong, they finally now, they're retiring in UK. So all their hearts and minds are about their village, the places where they were born and they grew up. But their kids, the children who are born in Hong Kong or the UK, so they have a different value system. So like I try to even go through your biography, by scale, whether she can read, but she wants to know the purpose of this. So because the way the schooling was done there, it is very different. So I think that will really bring the way people think and will be quite challenging in the future. And I think the organization like Tamu in UK, all the parents, I think need to rethink how our children can accommodate the way within our culture. Culture is a process, but at the same time, how we can do. So I think today, like you spoke lots of Tamu, which is very important for our generation. And there are also many Gurungs who don't speak Gurung. It's also very good opportunity to learn from you. So this is very important. And so I'd like to thank you once again, Dr. Tek, Anita Baini, and my wife Purna here. So we met you in 2016 in Tamil at Mahavir's restaurant as my friend. So once again, I'd like to thank you everyone, TECANET, behind the scene, Ganga Baini Ruh Gurung, who is our IT expert, social scientist, social media expert. So I'd like to thank you everyone for taking your Sunday with your family time and joining us and joining the TECANET family. So we hope we love to meet again, and thank you very much. And I want to say goodbye from my end, and thank you, Dr. Tek, for doing all the difficult tasks. Thank you very much.